I used to think that building something from nothing was the hardest part of entrepreneurship. Turns out I was wrong. The hardest part is watching someone you love tear it all down with a smile on their face. My name is Maya Chen, and this is the story of how my own sister tried to destroy everything I worked for, only to find herself working for me in the end. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes blood can poison everything it touches. I learned that lesson the hard way, in a conference room overlooking downtown Austin, watching my sister's face drain of color as she realized who her new boss was going to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Cedar Park, just outside Austin, our family wasn't wealthy, but we weren't poor either. My parents, David and Elena Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan in the 80s with nothing but dreams and determination. They built Chen's Corner Market from the ground up, working 16-hour days, 7 days a week, turning a tiny convenience store into the heart of our neighborhood. Every morning before school, Sofia and I would help stock shelves and ring up customers. Every evening, we'd do homework behind the counter while our parents counted the day's earnings. I was 2 years older than Sofia, and from the beginning, we were different in every way that mattered. While she charmed customers with her bright smile and easy conversation, I was the one memorizing supplier catalogs and calculating profit margins in my head. Sofia could make anyone laugh, but I could make the numbers work. She was the sunshine. I was the storm clouds that made sure we had enough umbrellas. When I graduated from UT Austin with a degree in business and marketing, I had a choice to make. My parents expected me to take over the family store eventually, to continue their legacy of serving our community. It was an honorable path, one that would have made them proud. But I had bigger dreams. I wanted to build something that could reach beyond our small corner of Austin, something that could make a real impact in the digital world that was rapidly changing how businesses operated. That's when I started Bloom Digital Marketing. I began working out of my cramped East Austin apartment, using my savings from years of part-time jobs and a small business loan that took months to secure. Those first 6 months were brutal. I was working 18-hour days, learning web design, social media strategy, content creation, and client management all at the same time. I lived on instant ramen and coffee, sleeping on my couch more nights than in my bed because I'd fall asleep at my laptop. But slowly, painfully, beautifully, it started to work. My first client was a local bakery that needed help with their Instagram presence. Within 3 months, their online orders had tripled. Word spread through Austin's tight-knit small business community like wildfire. The Vietnamese restaurant down the street wanted help with their Facebook ads. The boutique clothing store needed a complete website overhaul. A fitness studio wanted to launch a YouTube channel. By the end of my first year, I had 12 regular clients and enough revenue to rent a small office space downtown. By year 2, I had hired my first employee, a brilliant graphic designer named Marcus Rodriguez, who became not just my business partner, but my closest friend. By year 3, Bloom Digital had 15 employees and was handling marketing for some of Austin's most successful local businesses. Sofia, meanwhile, had graduated with a marketing degree of her own and was working at various agencies around town. She'd bounce from job to job every 8 to 12 months, always with a story about difficult bosses or toxic work environments. She was talented, no doubt about it, but she seemed to struggle with authority and long-term commitment. Our parents would worry about her constantly, asking me to talk to her, to help her find stability. I tried. God knows I tried. When she was between jobs, I'd offer her freelance work with Bloom Digital. When she needed references, I'd vouch for her skills and creativity. When she was struggling to make rent, I'd quietly help her out without making her feel embarrassed about it. I believed in family loyalty above everything else. I believed that success meant nothing if you couldn't share it with the people you loved. That's why I was so excited when Sofia called me in March of last year, bubbling with enthusiasm about a new opportunity. She'd been offered a position at Summit Media Solutions, one of Austin's largest marketing agencies. It was a significant step up for her, both in terms of salary and responsibility. She'd be working with major corporate clients, managing campaigns with budgets larger than most small businesses' entire revenue. We celebrated at our parents' house that weekend, sharing takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and listening to Sofia talk about her plans for the future. She seemed different, more focused and determined than I'd seen her in years. Our parents beamed with pride, finally seeing both their daughters established in successful careers. I should have known it was too good to last. The first sign of trouble came 3 months later, in June. I was at the Austin Tech Mixer, a monthly networking event where local business owners, entrepreneurs, and marketing professionals gathered to share ideas and make connections. I'd been attending regularly for 2 years, and it had become one of my favorite ways to stay connected with the Austin business community. I was talking with Sarah Kim, who owned a chain of Korean barbecue restaurants, about expanding her social media presence when I noticed the conversation at the next table had gone quiet. 3 men in expensive suits were looking at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. When they saw me notice them, they quickly looked away and resumed their conversation in hushed tones. That's when I heard my company's name. Bloom Digital, one of them was saying. Yeah, I've heard some concerning things about their practices. My stomach dropped. I excused myself from Sarah and moved closer, pretending to examine the appetizer table while straining to listen. My buddy worked with them last year, another voice continued. Said they overpromise and underdeliver constantly, charge premium prices for amateur work. That's not even the worst part, the first voice replied. I heard they steal ideas from other agencies, copy campaigns, and pass them off as original work. The words hit me like a physical blow. In 5 years of building Bloom Digital, I had never, not once, compromised on ethics or quality. Every campaign we created was original. Every promise we made to clients we kept or exceeded. Our reputation was built on trust, creativity, and results. I wanted to march over to that table and defend my company, to demand they tell me who was spreading these lies. But I was too shocked, too hurt to move. Instead, I left the event early, driving home through Austin's evening traffic with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the whispers followed me everywhere. At industry events, in coffee, shops where I met with potential clients, even at the grocery store where I'd shopped for years. People who had once greeted me warmly now offered polite but distant smiles. Referrals that had once flowed freely began to dry up. Potential clients who had seemed enthusiastic during initial meetings would suddenly go quiet, never returning my calls or emails. The impact on Bloom Digital was immediate and devastating. July was our worst month in 3 years. Too long-term. Clients decided not to renew their contracts, citing concerns about our reputation in the industry. A major project I'd been working on for months fell through when the client chose to go with Summit Media Solutions instead. I felt like I was drowning, watching everything I'd built crumble around me while having no idea why it was happening. The worst part was the helplessness. How do you fight rumors when you don't know where they're coming from? How do you defend yourself against accusations that seem to multiply faster than you can address them? That's when Marcus pulled me aside, one Thursday afternoon in late July. We were in my office, going over our quarterly projections, which looked grimmer than they had in years. Maya, he said carefully, I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it. I looked up from the spreadsheet that had been giving me a headache for the past hour. Marcus had been with me since year 2 of the business. He was more than an employee. He was my partner in every way that mattered, the person who had stood by me through every challenge and celebrated every victory. If Marcus looked worried, I needed to pay attention. What is it? I asked. He hesitated, running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was stressed. I was at a happy hour yesterday with some people from the industry. Jessica from Creative Collective was there, and she mentioned something that made me really uncomfortable. Jessica was a friend of ours, another agency owner who'd always been supportive of Bloom Digital. We'd collaborated on several projects over the years. She said she'd heard from multiple sources that Bloom Digital has been struggling with quality control issues, that we've been cutting corners to meet deadlines and charging clients for work we didn't actually do. The words felt like ice water in my veins. That's completely false, and Jessica knows it. She's seen our work firsthand. I know that, and I told her that. But Maya, she said the information was coming from someone who claimed to have inside knowledge of our operations. Someone who said they had worked closely with us and seen these issues firsthand. My mind raced through our current and former employees. We'd only had 2 people leave the company in the past year, both for positive reasons. One had moved to Seattle for a family situation, and the other had started her own freelance business with my blessing and support. Neither would have any reason to spread lies about us. Did Jessica say who this source was? Marcus shook his head. She wouldn't give me details, but she did mention that the same person had been talking to other agency owners around town. Maya, I think someone is deliberately trying to sabotage us. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just bad luck or industry competition. Someone was actively working to destroy my business, spreading carefully crafted lies designed to undermine everything I'd worked for. But who would do such a thing? And why? I spent that entire weekend trying to figure out who could be behind the rumors. I made lists of competitors who might see Bloom Digital as a threat, former employees who might have grudges, even clients who might have been dissatisfied with our work. But nothing made sense. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We'd always maintained good relationships with our competitors, treating the Austin marketing community as collaborative rather than cutthroat. Our employee turnover was minimal, and when people did leave, it was always on good terms. As for clients, our retention rate was over 90%, and we regularly received referrals from satisfied customers. The mystery was driving me crazy, but I tried to focus on what I could control. I doubled down on quality, having Marcus and I personally review every piece of work that left our office. I reached out to our existing clients to ensure they were happy with our services and address any concerns they might have. I started attending even more networking events, determined to combat the negative rumors with positive face-to-face interactions. But for every person I convinced that the rumors were false, 2 more seemed to have heard something negative about Bloom Digital. It was like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. The breaking point came in August at the Digital Marketing Summit, Austin's biggest annual conference for marketing professionals. I'd been attending for 4 years, and it had always been one of my favorite events. This year, I'd been looking forward to it as an opportunity to rebuild our reputation and connect with potential clients who might not have heard the rumors. I should have known better. I was giving a presentation on innovative social media strategies for small businesses, something I'd done successfully at dozens of events over the years. The room was packed, and for the first 15 minutes, everything went perfectly. The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes on my recommendations. Then someone in the back row raised their hand. "Ms. Chen," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly through the conference room, "given the recent concerns about Bloom Digital's business practices, how can small business owners be sure they're getting authentic, original strategies rather than recycled ideas from other agencies?" The room went dead silent. Every eye in the place was on me, waiting to see how I would respond to what was clearly a loaded question designed to embarrass me in front of my peers. I took a deep breath, drawing on every ounce of professionalism I possessed. I'm not sure what concerns you're referring to, I said calmly. But I can assure you that every strategy Bloom Digital develops is original and tailored specifically to our clients' needs. We've built our reputation on creativity and integrity, and we stand behind every piece of work we produce. But the damage was done. I could see it in the faces around the room. Doubt, suspicion, discomfort. Some people were looking at their phones, others whispering to their neighbors. The energy in the room had shifted completely. I finished my presentation as quickly as possible, but I knew it was a disaster. During the networking break that followed, people who would normally have approached me to chat or exchange business cards kept their distance. The few conversations I did manage were polite but brief, lacking the warmth and genuine interest I was used to. That's when I saw her. Sofia was standing near the registration table, wearing a sharp black blazer and a confident smile, chatting with a group of people I recognized as senior executives from various Austin marketing agencies. She looked successful, polished, completely at ease in a room where I now felt like an outsider. Our eyes met across the crowded conference hall, and for a moment, her smile faltered. Then she excused herself from her conversation and walked over to me. "Maya," she said, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "I didn't know you were presenting today. How did it go?" There was something in her tone that made my skin crawl, a note of false concern that I'd never heard from her before. She knew exactly how it had gone. The question in the back row had been too perfectly timed, too specifically crafted to damage my reputation. "It was fine," I said carefully, studying her face for any sign of guilt or discomfort. "That's great," she replied, but she wasn't looking at me anymore. Her eyes were scanning the room, as if she was looking for someone more important to talk to. "Well, I should get back to my colleagues. We're working on some really exciting campaigns at Summit Media." She started to walk away, then turned, back as if she'd just remembered something. "Oh, Maya? I heard through the grapevine that things have been tough for Bloom Digital lately. If you ever need advice on navigating industry challenges, you know you can always call me. We're family, after all." The words were sympathetic, but her tone was anything but. There was a coldness in her voice, a hint of satisfaction that made my blood run cold. That's when I knew. My own sister, the person I'd helped and supported, and believed in for years, was the source of the rumors that were destroying my business. Sofia, who had access to industry connections through Summit Media, who knew enough about Bloom Digital's operations to make her lies sound credible, who had always resented playing second fiddle to my success. I stood there in that conference hall, surrounded by hundreds of marketing professionals, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The person I'd trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. But I didn't confront her. Not there, not then. Instead, I did what I'd always done when faced with a crisis. I started planning. Because if Sofia thought she could destroy everything I'd built and walk away without consequences, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The drive home from the conference was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I sat in Austin traffic, watching the sunset over the city I'd called home for my entire adult life, trying to process what I'd just realized. Every red light gave me more time to think, and every minute of thinking made me more certain that I was right. Sofia was behind the rumors. My own sister was systematically destroying my reputation, using her position at Summit Media and her knowledge of our family dynamics to craft lies that would sound believable to industry insiders. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. The timing of when the rumors started, just a few months after Sofia began working at Summit Media. The specific nature of the accusations, which showed an intimate knowledge of how Bloom Digital operated. The way Sofia had acted at the conference. That false concern masking something much uglier underneath. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Sofia directly, not yet. Instead, I was going to do what I did best: research, plan, and execute a strategy that would not only clear my name, but ensure that justice was served. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, mapping out everything I knew. I created timelines, documented every rumor I'd heard, and when I'd heard it, traced connections between the people spreading the stories and Summit Media Solutions. The picture that emerged was damning. Sofia hadn't just been spreading random lies about Bloom Digital. She'd been conducting a sophisticated campaign of professional sabotage, using her industry connections to plant seeds of doubt that would grow and spread throughout Austin's marketing community. But why? What could she possibly gain from destroying my business? The answer came to me as I was scrolling through Summit Media's website, looking at their client list and recent acquisitions. Summit Media had been aggressively expanding over the past year, buying up smaller agencies and absorbing their client lists. They'd grown from a mid-sized firm to one of the largest marketing companies in Texas. And Bloom Digital, with our strong local reputation and loyal client base, would be exactly the kind of acquisition target they'd be interested in. Except, we'd never been for sale, and I'd turned down their informal approaches in the past. But if my reputation were destroyed, if clients started leaving and revenue plummeted, I might be forced to sell. And Summit Media would be perfectly positioned to swoop in and make an offer I couldn't refuse. Sofia wasn't just betraying me for personal reasons. She was helping her new employer eliminate a competitor and acquire our clients at a fraction of what they'd normally cost. The realization should have made me angry. Instead, it made me calm. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I was dealing with and exactly what I needed to do about it. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. If Sofia and Summit Media wanted to play games, I was going to show them what a real strategic campaign looked like. But first, I needed to make a phone call. Jennifer Walsh had been recommended to me by Marcus when I first started Bloom Digital. She was a business attorney who specialized in intellectual property and corporate disputes, and she'd helped me navigate several contract negotiations over the years. More importantly, she was someone I trusted completely. "Jennifer," I said. When she answered her phone the next morning, "I need to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. I think someone is trying to sabotage my business, and I need to know what my legal options are." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Jennifer had known me for 5 years, and she'd never heard desperation in my voice before. "How soon can you be in my office?" she asked. "I'm already in the parking garage." 2 hours later, I walked out of Jennifer's office with a clear understanding of exactly how much trouble Sofia and Summit Media were in. What they'd been doing wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. Defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, potentially even conspiracy if I could prove that Summit Media had directed Sofia's actions. But more importantly, I had a plan. Jennifer had recommended a private investigator who specialized in corporate espionage cases. Within a week, I'd have documented proof of who was spreading the rumors and when. I'd also have detailed information about Summit Media's business practices, their recent acquisitions, and their financial situation. Because if they thought they could force me to sell Bloom Digital by destroying its reputation, they were about to discover that they'd picked the wrong target. I wasn't just going to clear my name and save my business. I was going to make sure that Sofia and everyone else involved paid the price for what they'd done. The game was just beginning, and for the first time in months, I was going to be the one making the rules. The private investigator Jennifer recommended turned out to be a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, a former FBI agent who had transitioned into corporate investigations after retiring from federal service. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. When I met her at a quiet coffee shop in South Austin, she listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in a small leather notebook. "What you're describing sounds like a coordinated defamation campaign," she said when I finished explaining the situation. The question is whether we can prove it was deliberate and who was behind it. Carmen's plan was methodical and thorough. She would monitor industry events and networking groups, documenting who was spreading rumors about Bloom Digital and tracking the information back to its source. She'd also investigate Summit Media's recent business practices, looking for patterns of aggressive acquisition tactics. Most importantly, she'd try to establish a connection between Sofia and the campaign against my company. This kind of investigation takes time, she warned me. We're talking weeks, possibly months, to build a solid case. Are you prepared for that timeline? I nodded. After 5 years of building Bloom Digital, I'd learned that anything worth doing required patience and persistence. Whatever it takes. While Carmen worked on gathering evidence, I focused on damage control. The rumors had cost us 3 major clients and several potential projects, but we still had a core group of loyal customers who believed in our work. I decided to be completely transparent with them about what was happening. I started with Patricia Williams, who owned a chain of boutique fitness studios that had been one of our first major clients. Patricia and I had worked together for 3 years, and her business had grown from 2 locations to 8 during that time, largely due to the digital marketing strategies we'd developed together. Patricia, I said during our monthly check-in meeting, I need to tell you something important about what's been happening with Bloom Digital. She looked concerned immediately. Patricia was in her 40s, a former corporate lawyer who had left the legal profession to follow her passion for fitness and wellness. She was smart, direct, and not easily fooled by industry gossip. I explained everything: the rumors, their impact on our business, and my suspicion that they were being spread deliberately by a competitor. I didn't mention Sofia by name, not yet, but I was honest about the challenges we were facing. Maya, Patricia said when I finished, I've been working with you for 3 years. I've seen the quality of your work, your integrity, your commitment to your clients. If someone is spreading lies about Bloom Digital, they're either misinformed or malicious. Either way, it doesn't change my opinion of your company. That conversation gave me hope. Over the next week, I had similar discussions with all of our major clients. Without exception, they expressed confidence in Bloom Digital and committed to continuing our partnerships. Some even offered to serve as references for potential new clients, vouching for our work and our character. But I knew that client loyalty alone wouldn't be enough to rebuild our reputation in the broader Austin marketing community. For that, I needed evidence, and I needed a plan that would not only clear our name, but demonstrate the consequences of crossing Bloom Digital. Carmen's first breakthrough came 3 weeks after we started working together. She had been attending industry networking events with hidden recording equipment, and she'd captured several conversations where Summit Media employees were spreading specific allegations about Bloom Digital's business practices. Listen to this, she said, playing back a recording from a happy hour event at a downtown Austin hotel. The audio quality was surprisingly clear, and I could easily recognize the voices of 2 Summit Media account managers I'd seen at various industry events over the years. Yeah, we heard Bloom Digital has been struggling with retention issues, one voice said. Apparently, they've had several clients leave due to quality problems. That's not even the worst of it, the second voice replied. I heard from someone who used to work there that they routinely miss deadlines and then blame the clients for scope creep. Neither statement was true, but they were crafted to sound believable to someone who didn't know our actual track record. More importantly, the casual way these employees were discussing our supposed problems suggested this wasn't spontaneous gossip. They were repeating talking points they'd been given. This is good, Carmen said, but it's not enough for a legal case. We need to establish that these employees were directed to spread this information by someone in authority at Summit Media. That's when she suggested we take a more proactive approach. Your sister works there, right? What if we could get her to reveal her involvement directly? The idea made my stomach clench. Despite everything Sofia had done, Despite the betrayal and the lies, she was still my sister. The thought of deliberately manipulating her into confessing felt wrong, even though she'd shown no such hesitation about destroying my livelihood. But then I thought about Marcus, who'd been with me since the early days of Bloom Digital and was now watching his job security evaporate because of Sofia's lies. I thought about the rest of my team, talented people who'd chosen to work for a small agency because they believed in what we were building. I thought about our clients, who trusted us with their marketing investments and their business growth. Sofia had made her choice when she decided to wage war against my company. Now I had to make mine. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. Carmen's plan was elegantly simple. She would arrange for me to accidentally encounter Sofia at an industry event wearing a wire and accompanied by Carmen as backup. The goal was to get Sofia talking about her work at Summit Media and their competitive strategies, hopefully eliciting information that would demonstrate her involvement in the campaign against Bloom Digital. "The key is to make it seem natural," Carmen explained. "You run into your sister at a networking event. You're both marketing professionals. Of course you'd talk shop. If she's guilty, her own conscience might do the work for us." The opportunity came sooner than we expected. The Austin Women in Chi marketing group was hosting their quarterly mixer at a trendy rooftop bar downtown, and both Sofia and I had RSVP'd before our relationship imploded. It was the perfect setting, crowded enough that our conversation wouldn't stand out, but intimate enough that we'd naturally gravitate toward each other as familiar faces. I almost didn't recognize Sofia when I first spotted her across the rooftop terrace. She looked different somehow, more polished and confident than I remembered. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup was flawless, and she was wearing an expensive-looking dress that I was certain cost more than she could afford on her previous salaries. Success at Summit Media was clearly treating her well. She was holding court with a group of women I recognized as marketing directors from various Austin companies, laughing at something one of them had said. The sight of her looking so happy and carefree while my business suffered made my chest tight with anger. But I forced myself to stay calm. I had a job to do. Carmen was positioned near the bar, nursing a glass of wine and pretending to check her phone while keeping an eye on Sofia and me. The recording device was so small I could barely feel it taped to my chest, but knowing it was there made every heartbeat seem unnaturally loud. I waited until Sofia excused herself from her group to refresh her drink. Then I intercepted her near the bar. "Sofia," I said, injecting just the right amount of surprised pleasure into my voice. "I didn't expect to see you here." She startled slightly when she saw me, and for just a moment, I caught a flash of something that might have been guilt in her eyes. But she recovered quickly, putting on the bright smile I remembered from our childhood. "Maya? What a coincidence. How are you doing?" "I'm well," I replied, ordering a gin and tonic from the bartender. "Things have been challenging with the business lately, but we're working through it." Sofia's expression shifted to one of sympathy that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. The marketing industry can be so competitive these days." "It really can be," I agreed. "Sometimes it feels like there are people actively working against you, you know? Like they want to see you fail." I watched Sofia's face carefully as I said this, looking for any sign of recognition or discomfort. She sipped her wine, maintaining eye contact, but I noticed her hand was gripping the glass a little too tightly. "That's terrible," she said. "Competition should be about who can do the best work, not about tearing other people down." The irony of her words was almost too much to bear, but I kept my expression neutral. "Exactly. I mean, I understand why larger agencies might see smaller firms as threats. When you have the resources and connections that come with size, it would be easy to spread rumors or misinformation to damage a competitor's reputation." Sofia's smile faltered for just a second. "You think someone is deliberately spreading rumors about Bloom Digital?" "I don't know for sure," I said, leaning in. slightly as if confiding in her. But some of the things I've heard people saying are so specific, so detailed, that they had to come from someone with inside knowledge of our operations. That's awful, Sofia said, but her voice sounded strained. Have you considered that? Maybe the rumors are coming from someone who actually worked with your company? A former employee or client who had a bad experience? It was a leading question, one designed to plant doubt about the source of the rumors while deflecting suspicion from herself. But it also revealed that Sofia knew more about the nature of the rumors than she should have if she was an innocent bystander. We've considered that, I said, but our employee retention is excellent, and our client satisfaction scores are through the roof. The rumors don't match our actual track record at all. Sofia finished her wine in one large gulp, then glanced around the rooftop as if looking for an escape route. Well, I'm sure it will all blow over eventually. These industry whisper campaigns never last long. How would you know? I asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us for a long moment. Sofia's eyes met mine, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw her mask slip completely. The guilt, the calculation, the cold satisfaction she'd been hiding behind her sisterly concern were all there, visible for just an instant before she regained control. I just meant that the industry has a short attention span, she said quickly. There's always some new drama or controversy to focus on. But the damage was done. In that moment of unguarded truth, Sofia had revealed that she knew exactly what kind of campaign was being waged against Bloom Digital, and she knew it because she was the one orchestrating it. You're probably right, I said, setting down my drink. I should get back to networking. It was good seeing you, Sofia. Take care of yourself. I walked away before she could respond, making my way through the crowd toward Carmen, who had been watching our entire interaction from across the terrace. My hands were shaking slightly, but whether from anger or adrenaline, I couldn't tell. How did it go? Carmen asked quietly when I reached her. She knows, I said. She knows exactly what's happening to my business, and she knows because she's behind it. Carmen nodded grimly. The recording will help, but we still need more concrete evidence. What we have is suggestive, but not conclusive enough for a legal case. That evidence came 2 weeks later from an unexpected source. I was working late at the Bloom Digital office, trying to catch up on client work that had been delayed by all the crisis management I'd been doing, when Marcus knocked on my door. Maya, you need to see this, he said, holding his laptop. He set the computer on my desk and turned the screen toward me. It was an email thread, and I immediately recognized the Summit Media logo in the header. How did you get this? I asked. Jessica from Creative Collective sent it to me, Marcus explained. Apparently, one of her employees used to work at Summit Media, and this email chain got forwarded to her by mistake. She thought we should see it. I began reading, and with each line, my anger grew colder and more focused. The email thread was between Sofia and her supervisor at Summit Media, discussing what they called competitive intelligence initiatives. The language was corporate and sanitized, but the meaning was clear. They were systematically targeting Bloom Digital and several other smaller agencies, using their employees' industry connections to spread concerns about these competitors' business practices. Sofia's role was specifically outlined in the emails. She was responsible for relationship management with industry contacts, which translated to attending networking events and casual conversations where she would plant seeds of doubt about target agencies. The emails praised her for her natural ability to influence perception and her insider knowledge of local market dynamics. The most damning email was from Sofia herself, reporting on her progress with what she called the Bloom Digital Initiative. She detailed specific rumors she had spread, events where she had spoken to key industry figures, and her assessment of the campaign's effectiveness in damaging our reputation. The target is showing clear signs of distress, she had written. Client retention appears to be declining, and industry sentiment has shifted significantly. Recommend continuing current approach for another 60-90 days to maximize impact before potential acquisition discussions. I read that last line 3 times before the full implications sank in. This wasn't just about damaging Bloom Digital for the sake of competition. Summit Media was planning to wait until our business was sufficiently weakened, then approach us about an acquisition. They were trying to force me to sell my company by destroying its value first. And Sofia was helping them do it. "Maya," Marcus said softly, "what do you want to do?" I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of the office I'd worked so hard to build. For months, I'd been reacting to Sofia's attacks, trying to defend and rebuild while she continued to tear down everything I'd created. I'd been playing defense while she played offense. But now I had proof. Now I had evidence of exactly what she'd done and who had directed her to do it. Now I could stop defending and start attacking. "I want to call Jennifer," I said, "and then I want to destroy them." The next morning, I sat in Jennifer's office with Carmen and the printed emails, planning what Jennifer called the most satisfying case I've seen in years. "We have them dead to rights," she said, reviewing the documentation we'd gathered. Defamation, tortious interference, conspiracy, possibly fraud depending on how we frame the acquisition strategy. Summit Media's corporate insurance is going to hate this. But I wasn't interested in just winning a lawsuit and collecting damages. I wanted something more personal, more poetic. What if there was a way to turn this around completely? I asked. What if instead of just punishing them, we could actually use their strategy against them? Jennifer raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" I pulled out my phone and showed them Summit Media's website, specifically their recent press releases about aggressive expansion and acquisition targets. "They're growing fast, but they're also taking on a lot of debt," I said. "Their cash flow is probably stretched thin, especially if they're planning multiple acquisitions. What if we could create a situation where they became financially vulnerable instead of us?" Carmen grinned. "Corporate warfare. I like it." Jennifer looked more cautious. "Maya, I understand the desire for revenge, but we need to be careful not to cross legal lines ourselves." "I'm not talking about doing anything illegal," I said. "I'm talking about using the same competitive tactics they used on us, but doing it better." The plan we developed over the next hour was ambitious, risky, and absolutely ruthless. It would require perfect timing, significant resources, and more than a little luck. But if it worked, it would accomplish something that a simple lawsuit never could. It would give me the chance to look Sofia in the eye and show her exactly what it felt like to have everything you'd worked for torn away by someone you trusted. The first phase began immediately. Jennifer filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Summit Media and Sofia personally, alleging defamation, tortious interference, and conspiracy. The filing was deliberately public, sent to local business journals and industry publications along with a press release detailing the allegations. The response was immediate and explosive. The Austin marketing community was tight-knit, and news of a lawsuit alleging systematic sabotage spread through industry networks within hours. By the end of the day, my phone was ringing constantly, with calls from reporters, industry colleagues, and potential clients who wanted to know more about what had happened. I gave carefully planned interviews to the Austin Business Journal and the local marketing trade publications, presenting myself as the victim of an unethical competitive attack while being careful not to say anything that could hurt our legal case. The narrative was simple and powerful. A successful local entrepreneur had been targeted for destruction by a larger competitor who couldn't win through fair competition. The coverage was overwhelmingly sympathetic to Bloom Digital. Several articles highlighted our track record of client satisfaction and community involvement, contrasting it with Summit Media's aggressive expansion tactics. Industry leaders went on record expressing shock at the allegations and support for our company. But the real impact was on Summit Media's business relationships. Corporate clients didn't want to be associated with a company accused of unethical, competitive practices. Several major accounts put their contracts under review pending the outcome of the lawsuit. Industry partners began distancing themselves from Summit Media events and initiatives. Within a week, Summit Media's stock price had dropped 15%, and their CEO was giving interviews trying to minimize the scandal and deny the allegations. Phase 2 was more delicate and required careful timing. Using the financial intelligence Carmen had gathered about Summit Media's acquisition strategy and cash flow situation, I began reaching out to their target companies with a simple message. Summit Media was financially unstable and potentially facing significant legal liability. I didn't lie or spread false rumors. I simply shared publicly available information about their debt levels, recent legal troubles, and industry reputation concerns, but I shared it strategically with business owners who were considering partnerships or acquisition offers from Summit Media. The effect was immediate. 3 potential acquisition targets withdrew from negotiations with Summit Media, citing concerns about the company's stability and reputation. 2 major partnership deals fell through when the partner companies decided to wait until the legal situation was resolved. Summit Media's aggressive expansion plans, which depended on continuous deal-making and client acquisition, ground to a halt almost overnight. Phase 3 was the most satisfying. I had learned through Carmen's continued investigation that Summit Media was carrying significant debt from their recent acquisitions, debt that required monthly payments based on projected revenue growth. When their new business dried up due to the legal scandal, they began missing those payments. Their creditors started asking hard questions about the company's future viability. Stock analysts downgraded their rating. Industry publications began running articles about Summit Media's strategic challenges and reputation management crisis. Within 6 weeks of our lawsuit being filed, Summit Media's valuation had dropped by 40%, and they were actively looking for a buyer or investor to help them weather the storm. That's when I made my move. Through a shell company I'd set up with Jennifer's help, I submitted a bid to acquire Summit Media's assets at a fraction of their previous value. The bid was competitive but not generous, exactly the kind of opportunistic offer that distressed companies often had to accept. Summit Media's board, facing mounting debt payments and a deteriorating business situation, had little choice but to consider offers that would have been insulting just a few months earlier. When they accepted my bid, I owned the company that had tried to destroy me. And Sofia, along with every other Summit Media employee, now worked for me. The day I walked into Summit Media's downtown Austin headquarters as the new owner was the single most satisfying moment of my entire professional life. I'd spent months watching Sofia and her colleagues systematically attack everything I'd built, feeling helpless and defensive as they chipped away at my reputation and my livelihood. Now the tables had turned completely. I scheduled an all-hands meeting for my first day as owner, gathering every employee in the main conference room to discuss the transition and the company's new direction. Sofia was there, of course, sitting in the back row with a pale, stricken expression that told me she understood exactly what was happening. "Good morning, everyone," I began, standing at the front of the room with the confidence of someone who had just pulled off the most elaborate revenge plot in Austin marketing history. For those who don't know me, my name is Maya Chen, and I'm the new owner of Summit Media Solutions. I paused, letting that sink in, my eyes finding Sofia's across the room. I'm also the founder and CEO of Bloom Digital Marketing, which some of you may have heard of recently. The room was dead silent. Everyone understood the implications, even if they didn't know the full story. "I want to be clear about something from the start," I continued. "This acquisition isn't about revenge or settling scores. It's about building a stronger, more ethical company that can serve Austin's business community with integrity and excellence." I outlined my plans for integrating the two companies, restructuring operations, and establishing new ethical guidelines for competitive practices. Most of the employees seemed relieved that I wasn't planning mass layoffs or vindictive management. Tactics. But I had saved my most important announcement for last. There will be some personnel changes as we move forward, I said. Specifically, employees who engaged in unethical competitive practices will no longer have a place in this organization. Sofia's face went white. She knew what was coming. Maya Chen, I said, looking directly at her. Please see me in my office after this meeting. The conversation in my new corner office was brief and entirely professional. I didn't yell or lecture or express any of the anger I'd been carrying for months. I simply presented Sofia with the evidence of her role in the campaign against Bloom Digital and informed her that her employment was terminated immediately. Maya, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I can explain. No, I replied, calmly. You can't. What you did was deliberate, calculated, and designed to destroy my livelihood. There's no explanation that changes that. She started to cry then, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity, the kind of crying someone does when they finally face consequences for their actions. You're my sister, she said. Family is supposed to forgive family. I looked at her for a long moment, this person who had shared my childhood and my dreams, who had once promised she'd never forget my kindness and then tried to destroy me when it became convenient. You stopped being my sister the moment you decided to sabotage my business, I said. You made your choice, and now you live with the consequences. Security escorted her from the building, carrying a small box of personal items from her desk. I watched from my office window as she walked across the parking lot to her car, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I felt no satisfaction in her tears, no joy in her downfall. What I felt was closure, the kind of peace that comes from knowing that justice has been served and balance has been restored. Sofia had bet everything on destroying me, and she had lost spectacularly. Now she would have to find a new job in an industry where everyone knew exactly what she had done and why she had been fired. Her reputation was ruined, her career prospects were dim, and her relationship with our family would never recover. She had gotten exactly what she deserved. As for me, I had my business back, stronger than ever. I had proven that Bloom Digital could not only survive a coordinated attack, but emerge victorious. And I had learned something valuable about the difference between loyalty and weakness, between forgiveness and enabling destructive behavior. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. The integration of Summit Media and Bloom Digital took months, but it was worth every challenge. We kept the best employees from both companies, the ones who had maintained their integrity even when their leadership had not. We expanded our client base, improved our service offerings, and established ourselves as the largest independent marketing agency in Austin. Most importantly, we built a company culture based on ethical competition and mutual respect, the kind of workplace where success came from excellence rather than sabotage. Sofia never tried to contact me again. According to industry gossip, she left Austin entirely, moving to Dallas, where she eventually found work at a small agency that specialized in social media management. Her career never recovered from the scandal, and her reputation followed her wherever she went. Our parents were devastated when they learned what had happened. They tried to play peacemaker, to convince me to forgive Sofia and rebuild our family relationship. But some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, and some trust, once broken, can never be repaired. I had given Sofia every opportunity to succeed, had supported her through failures and celebrated her victories. When she decided to repay that loyalty by trying to destroy everything I had worked for, she made a choice that defined who she really was. And I had made my choice in response. Looking back now, I realize that Sofia's betrayal, as painful as it was, taught me something crucial about business and life. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones closest to you, ones who know exactly where to aim their attacks for maximum damage. But if you stay calm, think strategically, and remember that success is the best revenge, you can turn even the most devastating betrayal into the foundation for something stronger. Sofia tried to destroy me, and instead, she made me unstoppable. The weeks following Sofia's termination brought an unexpected sense of normalcy to my life. For the first time in months, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack on my reputation or my business. The integration of Summit Media's operations into Bloom Digital was proceeding smoothly, and our expanded team was already delivering exceptional results for clients who had previously been skeptical of working with us. But success brought its own complications. The story of how I'd turned the tables on Summit Media had spread throughout Austin's business community like wildfire, and suddenly everyone wanted to know the details. Industry publications requested interviews, business schools asked me to speak to their entrepreneurship classes, and other agency owners sought my advice on handling competitive threats. I found myself in the strange position of being simultaneously admired and feared. Competitors respected my strategic thinking, but worried about becoming targets themselves. Potential partners were eager to work with someone who had demonstrated such remarkable resilience, but they were also cautious about crossing someone who had proven capable of such comprehensive retaliation. The attention was flattering, but it also felt hollow. The victory over Sofia and Summit Media had restored my business and vindicated my reputation, but it hadn't healed the deeper wound of family betrayal. Every interview where I had to explain what my sister had done, every networking conversation where someone mentioned the scandal, reopened that particular cut. Marcus noticed the toll it was taking on me during one of our weekly strategy meetings. We were reviewing client retention numbers, which had not only returned to pre-scandal levels but actually improved significantly, when he set down his laptop and looked at me with concern. "Maya, you know you don't have to keep talking about this publicly, right? You've proven your point. Everyone in the industry knows what really happened. You could just focus on running the business now." I appreciated his concern, but he didn't understand the full picture. The public narrative mattered not just for our reputation, but for my own sense of closure. Every time I told the story, I was reclaiming it, taking ownership of what had happened to me instead of being defined by someone else's actions. "I know," I said, "but I think there's value in people hearing the truth. Other business owners need to understand that these kinds of attacks can happen to anyone, and they need to know that you can fight back successfully." Marcus nodded, but I could see he wasn't entirely convinced. He'd been with me through the worst of the scandal, had watched me struggle with the betrayal and fight to save our company. He understood better than anyone how much energy I'd invested in this battle, and he was worried about what would happen when the war was finally over. That evening, I stayed late at the office to catch up on the strategic planning work that had been pushed aside during the acquisition. The building was quiet, most of the staff having left hours earlier, and I found the solitude helpful for thinking through complex problems. I was deep in financial projections when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number, and I hesitated before answering. Elena had been calling regularly since news of Sofia's firing had reached our parents, always with the same agenda, trying to convince me to reconcile with my sister. "Hi, Mom," I said, putting the call on speaker, while continuing to work on my laptop. "Maya, sweetheart, we need to talk." There was something different in her voice, a heaviness that made me stop typing and give her my full attention. "What's wrong?" "Your father and I drove to Dallas last weekend to see Sofia." My stomach tightened. I'd specifically asked my parents not to get involved in the situation, to let Sofia deal with the consequences of her actions without family intervention. The fact that they'd gone to see her anyway felt like another betrayal, smaller than Sofia's but painful nonetheless. "How is she?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "She's struggling, Maya, really struggling. The apartment she's living in is tiny and run down. The job she found pays less than half what she was making at Summit Media. She's barely getting by. I felt a familiar stab of guilt, the same instinct that had driven me to help Sofia financially so many times in the past. But I pushed it down, reminding myself of everything she had done to deserve her current situation. "That's unfortunate," I said carefully, "but it's not my responsibility. She's your sister." Elena's voice carried the weight of decades of family loyalty, the same values that had made her and my father work 18-hour days to build their corner market from nothing. "She stopped being my sister when she tried to destroy my life," I replied, echoing the words I'd spoken to Sofia on her last day at Summit Media. "Maya, she made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but still just a mistake. People do stupid things when they're scared or jealous or desperate. That doesn't mean we stop loving them." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Elena alternating between guilt trips about family loyalty and detailed descriptions of Sofia's current hardships. My mother was a master at emotional manipulation, not out of malice, but out of genuine belief that families should always forgive and support each other regardless of circumstances. By the time I hung up, I felt drained and conflicted. Part of me wanted to maintain the hard line I'd drawn, to insist that Sofia deserved whatever consequences she was facing. But another part of me, the part that had been shaped by the same family values my mother was invoking, wondered if I was being cruel rather than just. The uncertainty followed me home that night and lingered through the weekend. I found myself thinking about Sofia constantly, remembering not just her betrayal but also our childhood together. The way she used to look up to me when we were young. The pride in her voice when she told people her big sister was starting her own business. Monday morning brought a distraction in the form of a crisis with one of our major clients. Richardson Development Group was a real estate company that we'd been working with for 2 years, helping them market luxury condominiums and commercial properties throughout Central Texas. They'd always been demanding clients, but they paid well, and their projects were high profile enough to enhance our reputation. The crisis began with an email from their CEO, Robert Richardson, requesting an emergency meeting to discuss serious concerns about campaign performance and strategic direction. The tone was formal and cold, completely different from the collaborative relationship we'd enjoyed previously. Marcus and I prepared for the meeting, assuming it was about campaign metrics or budget allocation, standard issues that could be resolved with data and strategic adjustments. We walked into Richardson's downtown Austin offices, confident that we could address whatever concerns they had raised. We were completely unprepared for what actually happened. Robert Richardson was waiting for us in his corner conference room, along with his marketing director and someone I didn't recognize, a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as a consultant from Dallas. The formal atmosphere immediately put me on edge. "Maya, Marcus, thank you for coming on short notice," Robert began, his tone professional but distant. "We've called this meeting because we've received some troubling information about Bloom Digital's business practices." My blood went cold. After everything we'd been through, after all the evidence we'd presented about Sofia's campaign of lies, someone was still spreading rumors about our company. "What kind of information?" I asked, working to keep my voice steady. The consultant from Dallas opened a folder and slid several printed pages across the table. "These are industry reports about your recent acquisition of Summit Media Solutions, along with documentation of the legal proceedings that led to that acquisition." I glanced at the documents, recognizing some of the press coverage and court filings from our lawsuit against Summit Media. "I'm not sure what your concern is. Everything about the acquisition was public and legal." "The concern," Robert said, "is the aggressive nature of the tactics you used to force Summit Media into bankruptcy. Several of my industry contacts have expressed worry about working with a company that might target them if they become competitive threats." The accusation was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. They were actually criticizing me for successfully defending my business against a coordinated attack, as if fighting back against unethical competitors was somehow wrong. "Robert," I said slowly, Are you familiar with what Summit Media and my former sister did to Bloom Digital? The deliberate campaign of lies and sabotage they conducted? We're aware of the allegations, the consultant interjected, but there are different ways to interpret those events. Some industry observers believe the situation could have been resolved through negotiation rather than the nuclear option you chose. Nuclear option. As if defending my livelihood and holding people accountable for their actions was excessive. As if I should have quietly accepted being destroyed by my own family member. Marcus leaned forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. With all due respect, Summit Media was systematically spreading false information designed to bankrupt our company. Maya did what any rational business owner would do under those circumstances. Perhaps, Robert said, but the end result is that we're uncomfortable continuing our relationship with an agency that has demonstrated such aggressive competitive instincts. We'll be transitioning our account to another firm at the end of the current contract period. The meeting ended shortly after that, with polite handshakes and promises to ensure a smooth transition. But as Marcus and I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I felt the familiar weight of injustice settling on my shoulders. "This is unbelievable," Marcus said as we reached our cars. "They're actually penalizing us for defending ourselves." He was right, but I was beginning to understand something troubling about the way my victory over Sofia had been perceived by some in the Austin business community. Yes, most people admired what I'd accomplished and respected my strategic thinking. But there was also an undercurrent of fear, a sense that I might be too ruthless, too willing to destroy competitors who crossed me. The Richardson Development Group defection was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, 2 other clients expressed similar concerns about our competitive philosophy and chose not to renew their contracts. Industry colleagues who had previously been warm and supportive became more cautious in their interactions, as if they were worried about saying the wrong thing and ending up on my bad side. The irony was bitter. Sofia's campaign of lies had damaged my reputation by portraying me as unethical and unreliable. My successful response to that campaign was now damaging my reputation by portraying me as ruthless and dangerous. Either way, I couldn't win. The realization that my victory might be turning into a different kind of defeat hit me hardest during the monthly Austin Women in Marketing Mixer, the same event where I had confronted Sofia and begun gathering evidence of her betrayal. I was standing near the bar, nursing a glass of wine and trying to network with potential clients, when I overheard a conversation between 2 marketing directors from local tech companies. "She's brilliant, no question about it," one of them was saying. "What she did to Summit Media was masterful from a strategic standpoint." "But would you want to work with her?" the other replied. "I mean, if you had a disagreement or your businesses became competitive, what would stop her from going nuclear on you too?" "Exactly. It's like hiring a pit bull. Great for protection, but you never know when it might turn on you." I slipped away from the bar area before they could notice me, but their words echoed in my head for the rest of the evening. A pit bull. That's how they saw me now. Not as a successful entrepreneur who had defended her business, but as a dangerous animal that might attack without warning. The drive home through Austin's evening traffic gave me time to think about what was happening and why. I had been so focused on winning the war against Sofia and Summit Media that I hadn't considered the broader implications of my tactics. Yes, I had been legally and ethically justified in everything I'd done. Yes, Sofia and her employers had deserved the consequences they faced, but perception mattered in business, and the perception of me was shifting in ways that could be just as damaging as Sofia's original lies. That night, I called Jennifer Walsh to discuss the situation. She listened patiently as I explained the client losses and the changing industry sentiment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me work through my thoughts out loud. "Maya," she said when I finished, "what you're experiencing is pretty common for people who fight back successfully against business attacks. There's always a segment of the community that prefers victims to stay victims, that gets uncomfortable when someone demonstrates real power. So what do I do about it? I can't undo what happened with Sofia and Summit Media, and I wouldn't want to even if I could. You don't undo it, Jennifer said. You reframe it. Instead of being the woman who destroyed a competitor, you become the woman who transformed a crisis into an opportunity. Instead of being known for aggression, you become known for resilience and strategic thinking. The advice made sense, but implementing it would require a fundamental shift in how I talked about the Summit Media situation and how I positioned myself in the industry. Instead of focusing on the justice of my actions, I needed to emphasize the positive outcomes and lessons learned. Over the following months, I worked carefully to reshape the narrative around the acquisition and my leadership style. When speaking, at industry events, I focused on the importance of ethical business practices and the value of transparency in competitive relationships. When interviewed by publications, I emphasized how the experience had strengthened my commitment to building a company culture based on trust and mutual respect. The effort was exhausting and sometimes felt dishonest, like I was minimizing the real harm that had been done to me in order to make other people more comfortable. But gradually, it began to work. New clients started expressing interest in working with Bloom Digital again. Industry colleagues became more relaxed in their interactions with me. The fear that had surrounded my reputation began to fade, replaced by respect for my business acumen and recovery skills. But the personal cost of managing this transition was significant. The constant need to moderate my language, to downplay, my anger about Sofia's betrayal, to present myself as measured and reasonable rather than righteously furious, left me feeling disconnected from my own experience. I found myself thinking more and more about my conversation with Elena, about her description of Sofia's struggles in Dallas. The guilt that I'd pushed down was returning, complicated by the realization that my complete victory over my sister might have been more thorough than necessary. Had I gone too far? Had my desire for justice crossed the line into cruelty? These questions kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my East Austin loft and wondering if there was a difference between being strong and being heartless. The answer came unexpectedly. During a chance encounter at Grind Coffee, the downtown Austin cafe where I often held client meetings, I was waiting in line to order my usual afternoon latte when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Maya. I turned around to find Patricia Williams, the fitness studio owner who had been one of my most loyal clients during the worst of the scandal. She was smiling warmly, but there was something tentative in her expression. Patricia, how are you? How are the studios doing? Really well, thanks to the marketing strategies we developed together. We're actually opening 2 more locations next quarter. We chatted for a few minutes about her expansion plans and the challenges of scaling a fitness business, but I could sense there was something else she wanted to discuss. When we reached the front of the line and ordered our drinks, she suggested we sit down for a few minutes. Maya, I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer, she said once we were settled at a corner table. Of course. Are you happy? The question caught me completely off guard. In all the months of rebuilding my business and reshaping my reputation, no one had asked me about my personal well-being. Everyone wanted to know about strategy and tactics and lessons learned, but no one had inquired about the emotional cost of everything I'd been through. I'm successful, I said carefully. The business is thriving. We're growing rapidly. Our reputation is strong again. That's not what I asked, Patricia said gently. I asked if you're happy. I opened my mouth to give another deflecting answer, but something in her expression stopped me. Patricia had known me for years, had watched me build Bloom Digital, from a small operation into a major agency. She'd supported me through the scandal and celebrated my victory over Summit Media. If anyone deserved an honest answer, it was her. I don't know, I said finally. I thought I would be. I thought that winning would feel different than this. What does it feel like? Empty. like I've spent so much energy fighting that I've forgotten what I was fighting for in the first place. Patricia nodded as if she'd expected that answer. Maya, can I tell you something about my own experience with betrayal? I gestured for her to continue. When I left corporate law to start my fitness business, my former law partners tried to prevent me from taking any clients with me. They sued me, claimed I was violating non-compete clauses, spread rumors about my ethical standards. It was brutal. This was the first time Patricia had ever mentioned legal problems from her career. Transition. During our 3 years of working together, I'd assumed her move from law to fitness had been seamless. What did you do? I fought back hard, hired the best lawyers I could afford, countersued for defamation, made sure everyone in the legal community knew what they were doing to me. I won, eventually. They had to pay damages and issue a public apology. That sounds like exactly what you should have done. Maybe, Patricia said. But you know what? Winning that battle cost me something important. I was so focused on being right, on proving they were wrong, that I lost sight of why I'd wanted to start my own business in the first place. By the time the legal fight was over, I was exhausted and bitter, and had forgotten how much I loved helping people get healthy and strong. She paused to sip her coffee, letting the parallel to my own situation sink in. It took me 2 years to find my way back to that original passion, she continued. 2 years to remember that success wasn't about defeating my enemies, but about building something positive. Are you suggesting I was wrong to fight back against Sofia? Not at all. What she did was terrible, and you had every right to defend yourself. But Maya, at some point you have to decide whether you want to be defined by what was done to you or by what you choose to build going forward. The conversation with Patricia stayed with me for days, challenging assumptions I'd held about justice and victory and the price of being right. I'd been so focused on proving that Sofia was wrong and I was right that I'd lost track of why Bloom Digital mattered to me in the first place. When I'd started the company 5 years earlier, it wasn't because I wanted to defeat competitors or accumulate power. It was because I believed in the transformative potential of good marketing, the way the right strategy could help a small business owner achieve dreams they'd thought were impossible. Somewhere in the battle with Sofia and Summit Media, I lost that sense of purpose. The agency had become a weapon in a personal war rather than a tool for positive change. The realization was both uncomfortable and liberating. Uncomfortable because it forced me to acknowledge that my total victory might have come at a cost I hadn't recognized. Liberating because it suggested there was a path forward that didn't require me to stay trapped in the role of either victim or aggressor. I started making changes immediately, small at first but gradually more significant. Instead of focusing our marketing efforts on competitive positioning against other agencies, we began highlighting the success stories of our clients and the positive impact our work had on their businesses. Instead of accepting speaking engagements, where I was expected to talk about corporate warfare and strategic retaliation, I sought opportunities to discuss innovation and collaboration in the marketing industry. Most importantly, I began to examine my relationship with Sofia through a different lens, not whether she deserved forgiveness, but whether carrying anger toward her was serving any useful purpose in my life. The answer was clearly no. My resentment toward Sofia wasn't protecting me from future betrayals or making my business stronger. It was just weighing me down, keeping me anchored to the worst period of my professional life instead of allowing me to move forward. But letting go of that anger didn't mean I was ready to reconcile with Sofia or welcome her back into my life. What she had done was still unforgivable, and the trust between us was still irreparably broken. What it meant was that I could finally stop letting her actions define my choices and my identity. The shift in my thinking became clear during a team meeting in late fall, almost a year after the Summit Media acquisition. We were discussing our strategic goals for the following year, and Marcus suggested that we consider acquiring another agency to continue our growth trajectory. There's a small firm in San Antonio that's struggling financially, he said. Their client list is solid, but they're having cash flow problems, We could probably get them for a fraction of their actual value. A year earlier, I would have jumped at the opportunity. Acquiring distressed competitors had proven to be an effective growth strategy, and the financial returns would be significant. But now the idea felt uncomfortable, too similar to the predatory tactics that Summit Media had planned to use against me. What if we approached them about a partnership instead? I suggested. Maybe we could help them solve their cash flow problems without forcing them to sell. Marcus looked surprised. That would be more expensive and complicated than an acquisition. Maybe, but it would also be more aligned with the kind of company I want us to be. Over the next few weeks, we developed a proposal for the San Antonio agency that offered marketing support, financial consulting, and collaborative opportunities while allowing them to maintain their independence. It wasn't as financially lucrative as an acquisition would have been, but it felt right in a way that pure business calculations couldn't capture. The partnership announcement generated positive coverage in industry publications and enthusiastic responses from other small agency owners who were impressed by our collaborative approach. More importantly, it signaled a fundamental shift in how Bloom Digital operated in the marketplace. We were no longer the company that had ruthlessly destroyed a competitor. We were the company that helped other businesses succeed. The transformation wasn't instant or complete. There were still moments when I felt the old anger resurface. Still times when I wanted to respond to competitive threats with overwhelming force rather than strategic patience. But gradually, I found myself thinking less about Sofia and more about the future I wanted to build. The business continued to grow, but in ways that felt sustainable and purposeful, rather than driven by a need to prove something to the people who had wronged me. Our team was happier, our clients were more loyal, and our reputation in the industry was stronger than it had ever been. Most importantly, I was finally beginning to feel something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Peace. Not the peace of victory or vindication, but the deeper peace that comes from knowing you're living according to your values rather than being controlled by your circumstances. Sofia had tried to destroy me and failed. But in the end, the most complete form of victory wasn't destroying her in return. It was building something so positive and successful that her betrayal became irrelevant to my story. I had won not by being stronger than my enemy, but by becoming better than the worst thing that had ever happened to me. The call came on a Tuesday morning in December, while I was reviewing quarterly projections in my office. My assistant knocked on the door with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between concern and confusion. "Maya, there's someone online too who says she's calling from Presbyterian Hospital in Dallas. She's asking for you specifically about Maya Chen." My stomach dropped. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite the months of anger, and the deliberate distance I'd maintained, Sofia was still my sister. The thought of her being seriously hurt or worse sent a jolt of panic through me that I wasn't prepared for. "Put her through," I said, my hand already reaching for the phone. The voice on the other end was professional but kind. "Ms. Chen, this is Sarah Martinez. I'm a social worker at Presbyterian Hospital. Your sister Sofia was brought in yesterday evening after a car accident. She's stable, but she's been asking for you." "How bad is it?" I asked, already grabbing my keys and purse. "She has a broken leg and some bruised ribs. Nothing life-threatening." "But Ms. Chen, I should mention that when we were going through her emergency contacts, we found a note in her wallet. It appears she's been struggling with some personal issues, beyond just the physical injuries." The drive to Dallas took 2.5 hours, during which my mind raced through every possible scenario. I tried calling my parents, but their phones went straight to voicemail. They were probably already at the hospital, having received the same call I had. The last time I'd seen Sofia was the day I fired her, watching her walk across the summit, media parking lot with tears streaming down her face. In all the months since then, I'd maintained my resolve not to contact her, not to check on how she was doing, not to allow any crack in the wall I'd built between us. But sitting in Dallas traffic, inching toward the hospital, I realized how much emotional energy it had taken to maintain that distance. How much effort I'd invested in not thinking about her, not wondering if she was okay, not allowing myself to feel anything but justified anger. Presbyterian Hospital was a sprawling complex in North Dallas, and it took me 20 minutes to find the right wing and navigate to Sofia's room. I paused outside her door, suddenly uncertain about what I would say or how she would react to seeing me. Through the small window, I could see her lying in the hospital bed, her left leg elevated in a cast, her face pale and drawn. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I remembered. The confident, polished woman who had worked at Summit Media was gone, replaced by someone who looked exhausted and defeated. I knocked softly and pushed the door open. Sofia's eyes widened when she saw me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "Maya," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came." "Of course I came," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure why I'd felt compelled to drive to Dallas so urgently. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," she said, attempting a weak smile. Which isn't far from the truth, apparently. I pulled a chair closer to her bed and sat down, still unsure what to say. The hospital room felt surreal, a neutral space where our family connection mattered more than the business rivalry that had torn us apart. "The social worker mentioned you'd been asking for me," I said. Sofia's eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. After everything that happened, after what I did to you, I'm here now." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Maya, I need to tell you something about why I did what I did, about everything that happened at Summit Media." I held up a hand to stop her. "Sofia, you don't have to explain. I know why you did it. You were ambitious, you wanted to succeed, and you saw an opportunity to help your new employer eliminate a competitor. I understand the logic." "No," she said firmly, her voice stronger than it had been since I arrived. "You don't understand. You think I did it for career advancement or to impress my boss, but that's not why." Something in her tone made me lean forward, giving her my full attention. "I did it because I was jealous," she continued. "Not just of your success, but of everything you represented. You were the daughter who had it all figured out, who made the right choices, who built something impressive from nothing. And I was the screw-up, the one who bounced from job to job, who needed help with rent, who could never quite measure up." The confession hung in the air between us. I'd suspected jealousy was part of Sofia's motivation, but hearing her articulate it so clearly was still surprising. "When I got the job at Summit Media, I thought it was finally my chance to prove I was just as capable as you were," she said. "But then my supervisor started talking about small agencies that were cutting into their market share, and your name came up. Bloom Digital was growing fast, taking clients that Summit Media wanted. And suddenly, I saw a way to finally be the successful sister, the one who solved problems instead of creating them. So you decided to destroy me." I told myself I was just sharing competitive intelligence, helping my company understand the market better. But deep down, I knew what I was really doing. I was trying to tear down what you'd built because I couldn't stand feeling inferior anymore. Sofia's honesty was both painful and oddly relieving. For months, I'd wondered if there was some strategic business reason for her betrayal that I'd missed, some calculated advantage she'd been pursuing. Learning that it had been driven by pure sibling rivalry somehow made it easier to understand, even if it didn't make it more forgivable. "The worst part," she continued, "is that it didn't even work the way I thought it would. Destroying your reputation didn't make me feel successful. It just made me feel empty and guilty. And when you turned the tables and bought Summit Media, when I realized how completely I'd underestimated you, I finally understood what I'd really done." "What do you mean?" I hadn't just attacked your business, Maya. I'd attacked the one person who had always believed in me, who had always been there when I needed help. I'd betrayed the sister who had supported me through every failure and celebrated every small success. And for what? To impress people who fired me the moment it became convenient? The tears were flowing freely now, and Sofia made no effort to wipe them away. I've spent the last year in Dallas trying to rebuild my career, but everywhere I go, people know what I did. They know I sabotaged my own sister's business. Who wants to hire someone capable of that kind of betrayal? I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. I'd been so focused on my own recovery that I hadn't considered how thoroughly Sofia's reputation had been destroyed by our public battle. While I'd emerged as a strategic genius who had turned adversity into triumph, she'd been branded as the sister who had tried to destroy her own family member for professional gain. "I deserve it," Sofia said, as if reading my thoughts. "I know. I deserve everything that's happened to me. But Maya, I need you to know that not a day has gone by when I haven't regretted what I did. Not because of the consequences, but because I hurt you. Because I damaged the relationship with the person who mattered most to me." A nurse entered the room to check Sofia's vitals, interrupting our conversation and giving me time to process what I'd heard. Sofia's explanation didn't change what she had done or erase the damage it had caused, but it did provide a context that pure business rivalry couldn't. She hadn't betrayed me for money or career advancement. She had betrayed me because she felt inadequate and saw destroying my success as the only way to feel better about herself. It was a deeply flawed and hurtful logic, but it was also recognizably human in a way that calculated business warfare wasn't. When the nurse left, Sofia looked at me with an expression of desperate hope. "Maya, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I'm asking anyway, not because I deserve it, but because I can't move forward with my life knowing that I destroyed the relationship with my sister." The request hung between us like a challenge. For months, I'd maintained that some betrayals were too deep for forgiveness, that some trust, once broken, could never be repaired. I'd built my identity around being the wronged party who had successfully fought back, the victim who had become victorious through strength and strategic thinking. But sitting in that hospital room, looking at my sister's tear-stained face and hearing her genuine remorse, I realized that clinging to my anger was serving no useful purpose anymore. Sofia had already paid a heavy price for her actions. Her career was destroyed, her reputation was in ruins, and she was living in virtual exile in a city where she knew no one. More importantly, my own life had moved beyond the crisis she had created. Bloom Digital was thriving, my reputation was stronger than ever, and I'd learned valuable lessons about resilience and strategic thinking that would serve me well in future challenges. Sofia's betrayal had ultimately made me a better business person and a stronger person. "Sofia," I said carefully, "I can't forget what you did. I can't pretend it didn't happen or that it didn't hurt me deeply." Her face fell, and I could see her preparing for rejection. "But," I continued, "I don't want to carry anger toward you for the rest of my life. It's not serving any purpose, except to keep me anchored to the worst period of my career." "What does that mean?" "It means I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free from the burden of hating my sister." Sofia's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. She began sobbing, not the careful tears she'd been shedding during our conversation, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from months of suppressed guilt and self-recrimination. I reached out and took her hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt after so many months of deliberate distance. "Maya," she said when she could speak again, "I don't know how to make this right. I don't know how to earn back your trust or prove that I'm not the person who did those terrible things." "You don't have to prove anything," I said. But if you want to rebuild our relationship, it has to be based on honesty from now on. Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. I can do that. And you have to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was before. We're going to have to build a new relationship. One that acknowledges what happened but doesn't let it define us going forward. Sofia nodded eagerly. Whatever it takes, I just want my sister back. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from Sofia's struggles in Dallas to my own journey of recovery and growth. For the first time in over a year, we talked like sisters, rather than like business rivals or legal adversaries. I learned that Sofia had been working at a small social media agency in Dallas, earning barely enough to cover rent and basic expenses. The job was beneath her qualifications, but it was the only position she could find given her reputation in the industry. The isolation and financial stress had been weighing on her heavily, contributing to the distracted driving that had caused her accident. In return, I told her about the challenges I'd faced in rebuilding not just Bloom Digital's reputation, but my own identity beyond the role of wronged party seeking justice. I explained how the victory over Summit Media had initially felt hollow, and how I'd gradually learned to focus on building something positive rather than dwelling on past grievances. "You know what's strange?" Sofia said as our conversation began winding down. "Hearing about everything you've accomplished since the acquisition, all the positive changes you've made at the company, makes me prouder than anything I achieved at Summit Media ever did." "What do you mean?" "I mean that even though I tried to destroy you, you didn't let it break you. You didn't become bitter or cruel or focused only on revenge. You used the experience to become better than you were before. That's the sister I remember. The one who could turn any challenge into an opportunity." The compliment was touching, but it also highlighted something important about our respective journeys since the Summit Media crisis. While I had been building something positive from the wreckage of our conflict, Sofia had been trapped in a cycle of regret and self-punishment that was preventing her from moving forward. "Sofia," I said, "you know you can't stay stuck in what happened, right? You made a terrible mistake. You've faced the consequences and you've expressed genuine remorse. At some point, you have to forgive yourself and focus on building something better. I don't know how to do that. Everything I touch seems to turn to ash." "That's because you're still defining yourself by the worst thing you've ever done. But that's not who you are, not entirely. You're also the sister who helped stock shelves at our parents' store, who celebrated with me when I got my first client, who has genuine talent for marketing even if you've made some terrible choices about how to use it." I could see Sofia considering this, weighing whether she was ready to begin the difficult work of rebuilding her identity beyond the role of guilty party seeking redemption. "What would you do if you were me?" she asked. "I'd stop hiding in Dallas and come home to Austin. I'd face the industry that knows what I did and prove through my actions that I'm capable of better. I'd find a way to use my experience, even the painful parts, to help other people avoid making the same mistakes. You think anyone in Austin would hire me? I think the right company would value someone who understands the real cost of unethical business practices and is committed to never repeating them. Your experience with Summit Media, as painful as it was, gives you insights that most marketing professionals don't have." Sofia was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her mind working through the implications of what I was suggesting. "Maya, are you saying you'd give me a reference after everything I did?" "I'm saying I'd tell the truth about who you are now, not just who you were during the worst period of your life." "But Sofia, any future we build has to be separate from Bloom Digital. I can't have you working for my company. Not because I don't trust you, but because it would be too complicated for both of us." She nodded quickly. "I understand. I wouldn't want that either. But knowing that you believe I can rebuild my career, that you see something worth saving in me, that means everything." Our parents arrived shortly after that, having driven From Austin, as soon as they received the hospital's call. Elena immediately began fussing over Sofia's injuries and asking pointed questions about her diet and living situation, while David stood quietly in the corner, clearly relieved that both his daughters were in the same room without screaming at each other. The family reunion was awkward at first, weighted down by months of tension and carefully avoided conversations. But gradually, as we focused on Sofia's recovery and immediate needs, the familiar rhythms of family interaction began to reassert themselves. Elena appointed herself Sofia's primary caregiver for the recovery period, insisting that she come stay at the family home in Cedar Park until her leg healed completely. David offered to drive to Dallas to pack up Sofia's apartment and arrange for her belongings to be moved back to Austin. I promised to make some discreet inquiries about marketing positions that might be appropriate for someone with Sofia's background and newfound understanding of professional ethics. By the time visiting hours ended that evening, we had established the framework for Sofia's return to Austin and the beginning of her efforts to rebuild her career and reputation. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, and there were still difficult, conversations ahead, but it was a start. The drive back to Austin gave me time to process what had happened and what it meant for my own ongoing journey. Forgiving Sofia hadn't been a decision I'd made rationally or strategically. It had been an instinctive response to seeing her genuine remorse and understanding that my anger was no longer serving any constructive purpose. But forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a single moment or decision. It was an ongoing choice to prioritize healing over justice, growth over revenge, family connection over personal vindication. There would be moments when I'd remember the betrayal and feel angry again. There would be times when Sofia's presence in my life would be complicated and uncomfortable. But I'd also discovered something important about myself in that hospital room. The woman who had built Bloom Digital from nothing and successfully defended it against coordinated attack was strong enough to extend mercy to someone who had wronged her. The entrepreneur who had turned crisis into opportunity was wise enough to recognize that some victories were less important than maintaining the capacity for compassion. Most importantly, I'd learned that true strength wasn't about the ability to destroy your enemies. It was about the ability to transform enemies back into family members when circumstances allowed for genuine change. Sofia's accident had forced a conversation that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise, creating space for honesty and vulnerability that our business conflict had made impossible. In a strange way, her moment of physical vulnerability had become an opportunity for both of us to shed the roles we'd been playing, righteous victor and guilty loser, and remember who we'd been to each other before ambition and jealousy had poisoned our relationship. The following weeks brought a series of small steps toward rebuilt trust and family healing. Sofia returned to Austin and moved temporarily into our parents' spare bedroom, giving her time to recover physically while beginning the harder work of rebuilding her professional reputation. I kept my promise to make discreet inquiries about appropriate job opportunities, but I was careful to be honest about Sofia's background when speaking with potential employers. I didn't try to minimize what she had done or gloss over the controversy surrounding her departure from Summit Media. Instead, I focused on her genuine remorse, her commitment to ethical practices going forward, and her unique understanding of the real-world consequences of professional betrayal. The approach yielded mixed results. Several companies were unwilling to consider Sofia at all, viewing her as too much of a reputation risk, regardless of how much she might have changed. But a few were intrigued by the idea of hiring someone whose personal experience had taught her hard lessons about business ethics and competitive practices. The position that ultimately worked out was with Austin Community Foundation, a nonprofit organization that helped local charities with marketing and fundraising strategies. The executive director, Maria Santos, was someone I'd known peripherally, through industry events, and she was specifically interested in Sofia's combination of marketing skills and personal experience with the consequences of unethical behavior. We work with organizations that depend on public trust, Maria explained during our initial conversation. Having someone on our team who truly understands how easily that trust can be damaged and how hard it is to rebuild once it's lost could be incredibly valuable. The job offer wasn't glamorous. Sofia would be earning less than half what she'd made at Summit Media, working primarily with small nonprofits that had minimal marketing budgets. But it was meaningful work with an organization that valued ethical practices above profit maximization, exactly the kind of environment where Sofia could begin rebuilding her professional identity on a foundation of genuine values, rather than pure ambition. Sofia accepted the position immediately, despite the significant pay cut it represented. The relief in her voice when she called to tell me the news was unmistakable. "Maya, I know this is just the beginning," she said. "I know I have years of work ahead of me to prove that I've really changed. But having the chance to start over, to use my skills for something positive, it feels like the first real hope I've had since everything fell apart." The conversation reminded me of my own feelings when I'd first started Bloom Digital, the sense of possibility that came from building something meaningful rather than just pursuing financial success. Sofia's journey would be different from mine, shaped by the hard lessons she'd learned and the relationships she'd damaged along the way. But it was her journey, not a reflection or imitation of my choices. As spring arrived in Austin, our family began settling into new patterns of interaction that acknowledged both the progress we'd made and the ongoing work that remained. Sunday dinners at our parents' house became regular events again, though the conversations were more careful and deliberate than they'd been before the crisis. Sofia and I developed a relationship that was warmer than the polite distance we'd maintained during the worst of our conflict, but not as easy and unguarded as it had been in our youth. We talked regularly, shared updates about our respective work, and occasionally met for coffee or lunch. But there were still topics we avoided, still moments when the weight of what had happened between us was palpable. The transformation wasn't just in our family dynamics. I noticed changes in myself, in how I approached business challenges and competitive situations. The experience of forgiving Sofia had shifted something fundamental in my perspective on power and justice and the purpose of success. When a competitor began spreading rumors about Bloom Digital's pricing practices, I responded not with the overwhelming force I might have used a year earlier, but with transparent communication to clients and strategic partnerships that demonstrated our value through action rather than retaliation. When a former employee left to start a competing agency and attempted to poach some of our clients, I focused on strengthening our own relationships and improving our services rather than trying to damage his reputation or sabotage his new venture. The approach felt more aligned with the values I'd started my company to represent, more sustainable than the cycle of attack and counterattack that had consumed so much energy during the Summit Media crisis. But the real test of my changed perspective came when I received an unexpected phone call from Kevin Thompson, the former CEO of Summit Media who had presided over the campaign against Bloom Digital and Sofia's role in it. "Maya," he said when I answered, "I know this is probably the last call you expected to receive, but I was hoping we could have a conversation about what happened between our companies." I was immediately on guard. Kevin Thompson had been the architect of Summit Media's aggressive expansion strategy, the person who had created the corporate culture that encouraged employees like Sofia to engage in unethical competitive practices. If anyone bore ultimate responsibility for the coordinated attack on my business, it was him. "What kind of conversation?" I asked carefully. "The kind where I take responsibility for what happened and try to make amends, if that's possible." The request was so unexpected that I wasn't sure how to respond. Thompson had disappeared from Austin's business community after the Summit Media acquisition, and I'd assumed he'd moved on to another market where his reputation hadn't been damaged by the scandal. "Kevin, I'm not sure what you think a conversation between us would accomplish. I think it might help us both move forward," he said. "But I understand if you're not interested. What my company did to you was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for creating the environment where that kind of behavior was encouraged. Against my better judgment, I found myself curious about what Thompson had to say. The admission of responsibility was surprising, coming from someone who had maintained his innocence throughout the legal proceedings. "Where are you now?" asked. "Back in Austin, actually. I've been doing some consulting work, helping small businesses with strategic planning. Nothing that would compete with what you're doing at Bloom Digital." We arranged to meet the following week at a neutral location, a coffee shop in South Austin that neither of us had any association with. I spent the intervening days trying to figure out what Thompson's agenda might be and whether meeting with him was a mistake. But I'd learned something important from my experience with Sofia about the difference between being strong and being rigid, between maintaining appropriate boundaries and refusing all opportunities for growth and understanding. Sometimes the conversations you least want to have are the ones that teach you the most about yourself and the world around you. The coffee shop Kevin Thompson had suggested was tucked away in a quiet corner of South Austin, the kind of place where local artists displayed their work on exposed brick walls and the baristas knew most customers by name. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table near the back where we could talk without being overheard by other patrons. Thompson looked different than I remembered from our brief encounters at industry events. The confident corporate executive had been replaced by someone who seemed smaller, more uncertain. His expensive suits had given way to casual khakis and a button-down shirt, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during his Summit Media days. "Maya," he said as he approached the table, "thank you for agreeing to meet." "With me? I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I replied honestly. "What is it you wanted to talk about?" He ordered a black coffee and sat down across from me, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking. "I want to apologize," he said simply. "Not just for what happened to your business, but for creating the kind of corporate culture that made those attacks possible in the first place." The directness of his statement caught me off guard. Throughout the legal proceedings, Thompson and Summit Media's lawyers had maintained that the rumors about Bloom Digital were simply market research and competitive analysis, not a coordinated defamation campaign. "That's not what your legal team argued in court," I said. "My legal team was trying to minimize liability and protect what was left of the company," Thompson replied. "But they weren't telling the truth, and neither was I. What we did to you was deliberate, systematic, and completely unethical." He went on to explain how Summit Media's aggressive expansion strategy had created pressure throughout the organization to eliminate competitive threats by any means necessary. Department heads were evaluated based on their ability to acquire new clients and neutralize competitors, with little attention paid to the methods they used. When Sofia came to us with insider knowledge about Bloom Digital's operations, it seemed like a perfect opportunity, Thompson said. She understood your business model, knew your clients, could speak credibly about your supposed weaknesses. We encouraged her to use that knowledge as aggressively as possible. "You encouraged her to lie about my company." "We encouraged her to position competitive intelligence in whatever way would be most effective in damaging your reputation," he said carefully. Whether that crossed the line into outright lies, we chose not to examine too closely. The admission was both satisfying and infuriating. Satisfying because it confirmed what I'd suspected all along about Summit Media's role in orchestrating the campaign against Bloom Digital. Infuriating because it represented exactly the kind of willful blindness that had allowed the attacks to continue for months. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "The legal case is settled. The company doesn't exist anymore. What do you gain from confessing?" Thompson stared into his coffee cup for a long moment before answering. "Because I've spent the last year trying to rebuild my career and my reputation, and I've realized that I can't move forward honestly without acknowledging what I did wrong," he said. "Every potential client, every business partner, every professional relationship I try to build is shadowed by what happened at Summit Media. People in this industry have long memories, and they remember how we operated. He explained how the scandal had effectively ended his career as a corporate executive. No major agency would hire him, and the consulting work he'd been doing was limited to small businesses that either didn't know about his background or were desperate enough to overlook it. But more than that, he continued, I've had time to think about the kind of leader I was and the kind of company I built. We destroyed good people's livelihoods for the sake of market share and revenue growth. We turned business competition into warfare, and we convinced ourselves that the results justified any tactics we used to achieve them. The conversation reminded me of my own reflections on the cost of total victory, the way that winning through destruction could hollow out the very thing you were trying to protect. Thompson had achieved his goal of rapid expansion and market dominance, but in the process, he'd created a company culture that was ultimately unsustainable. What happened to the other executives who were involved? I asked. Most of them have landed positions with other agencies, Thompson said. They were smart enough to distance themselves from the decision-making once things started falling apart. They can credibly claim they were just following orders, implementing strategies they didn't create. But you were the one giving the orders. I was, and that's something I have to live with for the rest of my career. The weight of that responsibility was evident in Thompson's demeanor. Unlike Sofia, whose betrayal had been driven by sibling rivalry and personal insecurity, Thompson's actions had been coldly strategic. He'd known exactly what he was authorizing and had calculated that the benefits outweighed the ethical costs. Kevin, I said, I appreciate the apology, and I believe it's genuine, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do with it. I don't expect anything, he replied. I just wanted you to hear directly from me that what we did was wrong, that you didn't deserve it, and that I take full responsibility for my role in what happened. We talked for another hour, covering everything from the specific tactics Summit Media had used to target Bloom Digital to the broader industry trends that had created pressure for such aggressive competition. Thompson was surprisingly candid about the internal dynamics at his former company, the way that success had gradually corrupted their values and led to increasingly unethical behavior. The irony, he said as our conversation began winding down, is that everything we did to try to destroy your company actually made you stronger. You came out of the crisis with better systems, stronger relationships, and a reputation for resilience that we could never have achieved through normal business practices. That doesn't excuse what you did. No, it doesn't. But it does demonstrate something important about the difference between building something sustainable and just trying to win at all costs. We focused so much on beating you that we forgot to build anything worth protecting. The observation struck me as both perceptive and deeply sad. Thompson had achieved everything he'd thought he wanted: rapid growth, market dominance, industry, recognition, only to discover that none of it could survive the methods he'd used to achieve it. As we prepared to leave, Thompson made one final request. Maya, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I'm wondering if you'd be willing to serve as a reference for my consulting work. Not an endorsement of what I did at Summit Media, but a statement that I've acknowledged my mistakes and am committed to operating ethically going forward. The request was audacious, asking the person he'd tried to destroy to vouch for his reformed character. But it was also consistent with the genuineness I'd sensed throughout our conversation. Kevin, I can't give you a blanket endorsement, I said. But if a potential client calls me specifically asking about your current work and approach, I'll tell them the truth about this conversation and my assessment of your apparent commitment to change. That's more than I deserve, he said. Thank you. Walking back to my car after the meeting, I reflected on how much my perspective on forgiveness and accountability had evolved over the past year. 6 months earlier, I would have refused to meet with Thompson at all, viewing any interaction with him as a betrayal of my own principles and the justice I'd fought so hard to achieve. But the experience with Sofia had taught me that holding on to anger, even justified anger, could become its own kind of prison. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing harmful behavior or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about refusing to let other people's worst actions continue controlling your own choices and emotional well-being. Thompson's apology didn't undo the damage he'd caused or eliminate the consequences he was facing. But it did represent a genuine attempt to take responsibility and change course, which was more than many people in his position would have offered. The real test of my evolved perspective came the following week, when I received a call from a small Austin marketing firm asking for my opinion of Thompson's consulting services. They were considering hiring him to help with strategic planning for their expansion, but they'd heard rumors about his role in the Summit Media scandal. I could have destroyed Thompson's chances with a single negative comment. I could have detailed everything he'd done to my company and recommended that they stay far away from him. A year earlier, that's exactly what I would have done. Instead, I told them the truth about both his past actions and his apparent commitment to change. Kevin, Thompson was responsible for unethical competitive practices at his previous company, I said. He authorized a campaign of lies designed to damage my business, and I would never recommend working with the version of him that ran Summit Media. The potential client thanked me for the warning and started to end the call, but I stopped. Them. However, I continued, I recently had a conversation with Thompson where he took full responsibility for what he did and demonstrated what appears to be genuine remorse and commitment to operating ethically. If you're considering working with him, I'd recommend judging him based on his current actions and approach, not just his past mistakes. The balanced assessment surprised the caller, who had clearly expected either a glowing recommendation or a complete condemnation. But it felt right to me, consistent with the values I'd developed about redemption and second chances. Thompson called me a few days later to thank me for the reference. The firm had decided to give him a chance, impressed by both his strategic expertise and what they saw as his honest acknowledgement of past failures. Maya, I want you to know that I won't waste this opportunity, he said. Every client I work with from now on will benefit from the lessons I learned the hard way at Summit Media. The conversation marked what felt like the final chapter in the Summit Media saga. I'd successfully defended my business, rebuilt my reputation, reconciled with my sister, and even found a way to extend mercy to the person who had orchestrated the attacks against me. The crisis that had once threatened to destroy everything I'd worked for had become the foundation for a stronger, more resilient version of both my company and myself. But the most significant transformation wasn't in my business or my relationships with former enemies. It was in my understanding of what success actually meant and what kind of legacy I wanted to build. The following month brought an opportunity to articulate that new understanding when I was invited to give the keynote address at the Austin Women in Marketing Annual Conference. It was the same organization whose quarterly mixer had been the setting for my confrontation with Sofia, and returning as the featured speaker felt like a meaningful full-circle moment. I spent weeks preparing the speech, trying to find a way to share the lessons I'd learned without turning the presentation into a therapy session or a detailed recounting of family drama. The challenge was to extract universal principles from a very personal experience to help other professionals understand how to handle betrayal and crisis without getting lost in the specifics of my particular situation. The conference was held at a downtown Austin hotel, with over 300 attendees representing marketing agencies, corporate marketing departments, and freelance professionals from across Central Texas. As I stood backstage waiting to be introduced, I thought about how different this moment felt from the last time I'd spoken at an industry event. A year and a half earlier, my presentation at the Digital Marketing Summit had been interrupted by a planted question designed to embarrass me and damage my reputation. I'd left that event feeling defensive and under attack, unsure how to fight back against enemies I couldn't identify. Now, I was returning to the same community as someone who had not only survived that attack, but emerged stronger and wiser. The anxiety I felt was the normal nervousness of public speaking, not the sick dread of someone whose livelihood was under constant threat. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conference organizer announced, "please welcome Maya Chen, founder and CEO of Bloom Digital Marketing." The applause was warm and sustained, and I could see genuine interest and anticipation in the faces of the audience. Many of them knew my story, at least the public version of it, and they were curious to hear what lessons I'd drawn from the experience. 2 years ago, I began. I thought I understood what it meant to be successful in business. I had built a thriving agency, developed strong client relationships, and earned the respect of my peers in the Austin marketing community. I was confident, ambitious, and convinced that hard work and ethical practices were all I needed to achieve my goals. I paused, making eye contact with audience members across the room. Then someone I trusted betrayed me in the most devastating way possible, and I learned that success isn't just about what you build. It's about how you respond when everything you've built is under attack. Over the next 40 minutes, I shared the story of the campaign against Bloom Digital, my discovery of Sofia's role in it, and the strategic response that had ultimately led to victory over Summit Media. But I focused less on the tactical details of corporate warfare and more on the emotional and ethical challenges of fighting back without losing your integrity. "The easiest thing in the world is to become what you're fighting against," I said. "When someone attacks you through lies and manipulation, the temptation is to respond with lies and manipulation of your own. When someone betrays your trust, the instinct is to become someone who trusts no one." I talked about the importance of strategic thinking over emotional reaction, the value of building alliances and gathering evidence before responding to attacks, and the power of transparency in combating false rumors. But I also discussed the less obvious lessons I'd learned: the danger of defining yourself by your enemies, the hollow feeling that comes from victory achieved purely through destruction, and the unexpected freedom that comes from forgiveness. "Winning isn't enough," I said toward the end of my presentation. "If all you accomplish is destroying the people who tried to destroy you, you haven't built anything lasting. Real success comes from using your experiences, even the painful ones, to create something positive that serves a purpose beyond your own vindication." The response was overwhelmingly positive. During the question and answer session, professionals shared their own experiences with workplace betrayal, industry rumors, and competitive pressure. Several people asked for specific advice on handling similar situations, and I was struck by how universal these challenges were across different types of businesses and career levels. One question came from a young woman who introduced herself as a freelance social media consultant. "Maya, you talked about the importance of forgiveness, but how do you know when someone deserves a second chance? How do you distinguish between genuine remorse and manipulation?" It was a thoughtful question that got to the heart of one of the most difficult aspects of my journey with Sofia and Thompson. "I think the key is looking at actions rather than words," I said. "Someone who's genuinely committed to change will demonstrate that commitment through their behavior over time, not just through apologies or promises. They'll take responsibility without making excuses. They'll accept consequences without demanding immediate forgiveness, and they'll prove their sincerity through consistent ethical choices going forward." Another audience member asked about the business impact of the crisis and recovery. "Did going through this experience hurt your company's growth, or did it ultimately help you?" "Both," I answered honestly. "In the short term, the attacks cost us clients, revenue, and opportunities. We lost almost a year of growth while we were fighting to defend our reputation. But in the long term, surviving that crisis made us stronger, more resilient, and more focused on our core values. The clients we have now chose to work with us not just because of our capabilities, but because they've seen how we handle adversity." The conference ended with several attendees approaching me to continue conversations about crisis management, competitive strategy, and professional ethics. But the interaction that meant the most to me came from a woman who waited until most of the crowd had dispersed before introducing herself. "Ms. Chen, my name is Rachel Martinez. I work for Austin. Community Foundation. I recognized the name immediately. This was Sofia's supervisor, the executive director who had given my sister a second chance when most other employers wouldn't consider her. I wanted to thank you, Rachel continued, for the reference you provided for Sofia. She's been an exceptional employee, and her unique perspective on business ethics has been incredibly valuable to our organization. How is she doing? I asked. Really well. She's helped us develop new guidelines for vendor relationships and competitive practices that have improved our effectiveness and credibility with donors. But more than that, she brings a level of authenticity and humility to her work that I don't often see in marketing professionals. The update on Sofia's progress was gratifying. Confirmation that second chances could lead to genuine positive change when they were earned and appreciated. Rachel, can I ask you something? When you decided to hire Sofia despite her background, what convinced you to take that risk? Honestly, it was your reference, she said. The fact that someone who had been so deeply wronged by her was willing to speak honestly about both her failures and her potential for growth told me that she had probably learned something important from the experience. The conversation reminded me of something I'd been reflecting on throughout my recovery and reconciliation process. The most meaningful forms of justice weren't always about punishment or revenge. Sometimes they were about creating opportunities for people to become better than they had been at their worst moments. Sofia hadn't just been forgiven, she'd been given the chance to use her painful experience to contribute something positive to the world. Thompson hadn't just been allowed to rebuild his career, he was being held to higher standards because of his acknowledged past failures. And I hadn't just survived a coordinated attack on my business. I'd learned lessons about resilience, leadership, and forgiveness that made me a better entrepreneur and a better person. As I drove home from the conference that evening, I thought about how different my life looked compared to the lowest point of the crisis 18 months earlier. Bloom Digital was thriving, stronger and more respected than it had ever been. My relationship with Sofia was rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. My approach to business competition was more strategic and less reactive. My understanding of success encompassed not just financial metrics, but also ethical standards and positive impact. Most importantly, I no longer defined myself by what had been done to me or what I had done in response. The Summit media crisis was an important part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. I was building a future that honored the lessons I'd learned without being constrained by the circumstances that had taught them. The final validation of how far I'd come arrived a few weeks later in the form of an email from a business magazine requesting an interview for their annual Entrepreneurs to Watch feature. They wanted to profile leaders who had demonstrated exceptional resilience and innovative thinking in the face of significant challenges. The article, when it was published, focused primarily on Bloom Digital's growth strategy and our approach to client relationships. The Summit media crisis was mentioned only briefly as background context for understanding my perspective on competitive dynamics and crisis management. Reading the profile, I realized that I had finally achieved what I'd been working toward without fully understanding it. The ability to be known for what I'd built rather than what I'd survived. My identity as an entrepreneur was no longer tied to being the victim of betrayal or the victor in corporate warfare. I was simply Maya Chen, founder of a successful marketing agency that helped Austin businesses achieve their goals through creative and ethical strategies. That evening, I called Sofia to share the news about the magazine feature. She was genuinely excited, proud of her sister's recognition in a way that felt completely free of the jealousy and resentment that had once poisoned our relationship. "Maya, I'm so happy for you," she said. "And I'm grateful that you've given me the chance to be part of your success story again, even in a small way." "Sofia, you're not part of my success story in a small way. You're part of it in the most important way possible. You helped me learn that strength isn't about defeating your enemies. It's about transforming them back into family when circumstances allow for genuine change." The conversation ended with plans for our upcoming Sunday dinner at our parents' house, a weekly tradition that had become one of my favorite parts of the week. Elena would fuss over both of us, making sure we were eating enough and getting enough rest. David would update us on the latest drama at the corner market and ask for advice on modernizing their payment systems. Sofia would share stories from her work at the foundation, and I would talk about new developments at Bloom Digital. It was ordinary, comfortable, and exactly what family was supposed to be. A place where you could be yourself without pretense or performance, where your worth wasn't measured by your professional achievements or failures, where love was offered freely rather than earned through competition. Looking back now, I can see that Sofia's betrayal was both the worst thing that ever happened to me professionally and one of the most important experiences of my life. It taught me lessons about resilience, strategy, and forgiveness that I never could have learned through success alone. But more than that, it showed me the difference between winning and building something worth protecting. Sofia tried to destroy what I had created, and in defending it, I discovered what it was really worth. Not just the revenue and recognition, but the values and relationships and sense of purpose that made the work meaningful. In the end, my greatest victory wasn't acquiring Summit Media or rebuilding my reputation or even reconciling with my sister. It was becoming the kind of person who could experience profound betrayal and emerge not bitter or cynical, but wiser and more committed to building something positive. Sofia had tried to tear down everything I'd worked for, and instead, she'd helped me build something stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. For that, in the strangest way, I was finally grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.